The last time we saw each other was in Singapore back in September, and the news headlines just have been relentless. But I thought I would start from the very obvious. We're now entering the 9th month of the Ukraine war, and it's really triggering a global energy and economic crisis. So I thought I would start by asking you, what has the impact been here in Southeast Asia?
Well, I think that obvious that, we've also felt the economic impact. It's not confined just to Europe. The energy prices, food prices, it's added further to the problem of inflation and the possibility of the world going into recession. But for me, being here in the region, I think the implication, the most important implication, is that we cannot take peace for granted. Peace and stability is very fragile. And peace and stability is what we need the most right now, especially in Asia because of the rise of Asia. Asia has become the epicenter of the global economy. A consequence of that is that we have this intensified geopolitical competition in the region. Mm-hmm. And the geopolitical competition that we face is like none other before. Even during the Cold War, I think this is a competition that embraces all dimensions of the relationship. Mm-hmm. It's a competition between a status quo power, the established superpower, which is the United States, and a rising power, which has risen, in fact, China. And even in the days of the Cold War, the United States did not face a peer competitor like the competitor that the United States is facing in China right now.
So on that point, this week, Biden at a G20 said, I quote, there need not be a Cold War with China. So first of all, do you think he can avoid it? And also, do you think the United States has been partially responsible for what we're seeing right now?
Well, it must be avoided, and I really think that it's time to really tone down the rhetoric rather than play up the rhetoric, because, we have so many challenges that we're facing. And for us in the region, of course, we would like the two major powers to recognize that they have a responsibility, first to themselves, to manage the relationship in a better way. Second, they have a responsibility to us in the region to ensure that they work to maintain peace and stability in the region so we can get on with this more important business, especially those of you in this room are promoting economic recovery. Mm-hmm. So the message would be, yes, we understand that you will compete. Competition, geopolitics has been part of international relations, for always. But this competition must be better managed. This competition must also embrace the elements of cooperation, because there are so many areas where they can cooperate, where we face common challenges, and the role of the two major powers are so crucial.
So you've been a career diplomat for 3 decades or so. I feel like we're seeing so much political disengagement these days. I just want to ask, how has diplomacy changed?
Well, when I joined the foreign ministry 40 years ago, of course, life in a way was more simple. It was clear who our friends were. It was clear where the dividing line was, because that was during the Cold War. Mm-hmm. But it was also tough because Thailand faced a crisis of survival. We were the frontline state, and in those days, I'm not sure some of the young people in this room will recall, but in those days we still had the domino theory. Uh-huh. Indochina fell to communism. People thought that the next country to fall would be Thailand. So we were, the threat was clear. the need, what we need to do was very clear. But here, I think the nature of threat has changed. And there are so many issues that we have to handle. And so diplomacy has to be more versatile these days. And it's not just in the region, because even though globalization seems to be a bad word these days, but I think the world has, in fact, become globalized. And so it's more independent, and even Thailand, we have to look way, way beyond Thailand and to see what's happening around the world and how they impact on us. And also the nature of threat, sometimes it's not very clear because it's not the kind of threat we faced during the Cold War. Mm-hmm. We have the non-traditional threats, pandemics, the climate change, transnational crime. So these are the threats that we're facing. So as a diplomat, I think we have to be attuned to these new challenges. And now, what is needed more and more is international cooperation. And it seems that international cooperation is lacking these days.
I have a question about ASEAN as a bloc. So at the foreign ministers meeting in August, member countries refrained from pointing a finger at Russia, criticizing Russia by name, and Singapore actually was the only country that imposed sanctions. It's a two-part question. The first question is, do you think this is a case of economics dictating foreign policy? And second question is, in hindsight, given that we're 9 months into the war, do you feel like it was a mistake to stay silent?
Well, for me, it's very clear. And I also don't agree with the stance taken by my government regarding this resolution on the illegal annexation of territories by Russia, because we voted to abstain. Because as a small country or a mid-sized power, what is crucially important is respect for international rules and international norms. And so in the case of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, it's clear that they have violated the fundamental norms of international relations in the UN Charter. And if we allow that to accept that, it's going to set a bad precedent for that might is right. And for Thailand, might must not be right, and for other countries in ASEAN. But having said that, I understand that each ASEAN, we're not like the EU where it's a supranational organization. We're an association of sovereign states. So each country will have their different position based on their national interests, and maybe they see also the broader geopolitics that is being played out.
You say that the ASEAN is not like the EU. However, I would like to point out that the EU also can reach a consensus on, for example, embargoing Russian oil. So it does seem to me that there's some deep rift between the member countries. So in your view, what is the purpose of these blocs if you can't bring everybody to the table and reach agreement on such important geopolitical issues?
Well, I think you cannot compare ASEAN to EU. Their evolution is different. For us, the most important task of ASEAN is to maintain peace and stability in the region, to maintain harmonious relations among countries of the region, first task. Second task, as much as possible, to work collectively on matters where we share common interests, so that we have greater leverage, our presence is felt, and we can advance our interests in a better way.
I'm going to ask you a question that I feel like a lot of geopolitical analysts always ask. How should ASEAN position itself in between US and China, given that we have the Indo-Pacific economic framework, and obviously we're seeing the rising influence of China these days?
the answer that you hear often is we don't take sides.
Is it possible to not take sides?
But it's not going to be easy. It depends. I think we do not take sides, but we have to take a stand. So that means that depends on the situation, depends on the issue. We have to take a stand in favor of our interests, in favor of the principles that we adhere to. I think to be neutral sometimes is not serving your interests at all. And to be neutral means having no position. So when I say we don't take side, it doesn't mean that we don't take a stand. So that's crucial. But I think in this game of balancing, it's not so easy because you have to recognize the reality of one thing, the reality of China. China,
even with
is
even with the China that's slowing down.
Well, definitely, because China is a superpower in the region. China will always be in the region. China is the reality that we have to deal with every day, whether it's strategically, economically. China is our biggest trading partner. China is a growing investor. China is even in spite of the slowdown, is the locomotive of regional growth. But at the same time, I'm always reminded by what my Vietnamese colleague told me. And I think what he said applies to all the ASEAN countries. He said, anybody who aspires to be the leader of Vietnam will have to be able to do two things. First, live with China. Second, stand up to China. So this is the reality.
It's a tough balancing act.
Because China's rise brings benefits to all, but also causes vulnerabilities for us. So how do we benefit as well as safeguard ourselves against these vulnerabilities? That is why we need the United States in the region to maintain the balance of power, in a way to deter China. But, and this is the fine point, but we don't want to work with the United States in the game of isolating or containing China, because you cannot isolate or contain China. You must constructively engage China. So this is where we disagree with the United States in terms of its free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, because obviously it's meant to contain China. And I think what we need, which is the best option for countries in the region, is to have what we call a multipolar balance of power, where we have countries like Japan, we have powers like India, the ROK, Australia, engaging in the region. And if we have that kind of a multipolar balance of power, I think it gives us a little bit more room to breathe, and more room to maneuver.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, on that very uplifting note, I'm afraid we're actually running out of time. It's really a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for your insight, and thank you, Ettore and Jeanette.